What's the best pet poison dart frog for a beginner? That's a tough question to answer since a lot of dart frogs in the hobby are beginner friendly and they all have various pros and cons that make them better or worse options for each keeper. But if I had to choose one species to recommend as the ultimate beginner species, solely based on hardiness and how easy it is to care for, then my answer would definitely be Epipedobates anthonyi. In this video, I'll be talking about what makes them such great dart frogs for beginners and how I keep mine. But before we get into that, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and share it with a couple of people. It's the best way for you to support me and it really goes a long way. During the summer, I'll try my best to provide you with as much content as possible, and I have several big projects on the way, including a guide to breeding dart frogs and an updated collection tour. But that's enough for the intro, let's get into the video. Epipedobates anthonyi, also known as Anthony's poison dart frog, is a dart frog naturally found in Ecuador and Peru. It's a fairly small species, reaching around 2 to 2.5 centimeters or 0.8 to 1 inch as adults, with females being slightly bigger than males. I usually call them semi-thumbnails, since they're slightly bigger than the thumbnail dart frogs from the Ranitomea and Ophaga genus, but still significantly smaller than, for example, Dendrobates species. The most common locality in the hobby is called Santa Isabel, and as adults they are cherry red with long white stripes going from the front to the back. They start out brown in color, but the brown color turns red over time. There are also plenty of other locales out there, many with blue spots or stripes instead of white ones. The one that I keep is called Epipedobates anthonyi Rio Daule, which is a very rare locale that's probably only available on the Swedish market. But there are many similar looking locales out there such as Ancas, Rio Saladillo and Buena Esperanza. Sorry if I butchered any of those names. I heard someone call this species the guppies of the dart frog hobby, and I think that's quite an accurate description. They are very cheap and readily available because of the fact that they reproduce like crazy, are easy to care for and don't require that much room. It might not be the biggest, most colorful or most impressive dart frog out there, but they're a staple in the hobby and they're difficult not to love. They are actually commonly kept free roaming in indoor tropical greenhouses throughout the world, both due to their hardiness and the fact that they're one of the few species that will reproduce at a large extent in that environment, since they often put their tadpoles together in large water features, unlike most other dart frogs that prefer individual smaller water sources for each of their tadpoles. Epipedobates anthonyi Rio Daule, which is the local I keep, is actually kept free roaming in the greenhouses of the Gothenburg Botanical Garden here in Sweden. What supposedly started with a few individuals being released there in the 90s has now grown to a stable population with hundreds, possibly even thousands of animals. Due to the fact that this locale is quite rare and unique for our botanical garden, they are sometimes called Gothenburg dart frogs. The greenhouses here are actually being torn down and rebuilt in the near future though, and therefore frogs have been distributed to private breeders, including myself, to eventually be released back once the new greenhouses are in place around 2026. There are two big advantages with keeping small dart frog species compared to large ones. The first one is that they don't need that much room, and the second one is that they don't need that much food. I can't understate how convenient the latter is. It makes it cheaper and easier since you won't have to culture as many fruit flies, and it also makes it less stressful if your fruit fly cultures were to crash or suddenly produce less, since a small dart frog would be fine for quite a while with only a few fruit flies or by snacking on springtails and isopods from the cleanup crew. Epipedobates are actually very ferocious eaters for their size in my experience, but they can't really take on any big prey items that are bigger than fruit flies since they're still very small frogs. Small dart frogs are usually also a lot more sensitive to various other problems than bigger species are, but in my experience, the Epipedobates genus is somewhat of an exception to that rule, and they seem hardier than most other dart frogs, at least as adults. In fact, in the greenhouses that I mentioned here in Gothenburg, the frogs even venture out into the succulent house occasionally without seeming to be too affected by the dry environment. They also remain active even when the temperatures drop quite a few degrees during the winter in parts of the greenhouses, even though they usually move towards the warmest room during those times. Of course, I'm not encouraging keeping your frogs in dry environments or cooling them down for no reason, but my point is that these frogs are relatively adaptable compared to other dart frogs, and they won't be the first to die because of some minor husbandry mistake that a beginner might make. Something I really like about the Epipedobates is that they're some of the most group-friendly dart frogs out there. They might wrestle or fight occasionally, but it's usually not a regular occurrence or something that will leave any serious long-term consequences, unlike for some other species. There's nothing wrong with keeping a single frog or only a pair in a vivarium, but Epipedobates anthonyi tend to be a lot bolder and more active if they're kept in a group, and their group dynamic makes them very interesting to watch. They're also a species that usually does quite well in some mixed vivariums, since they're normally friendly towards tank mates, but mixing species isn't something that's normally recommended to beginners for many reasons. If you want to learn more about mixing species and why we usually avoid it, check out my last video. It's going to be linked in the description down below. They're not the boldest species, but in my experience, they're still far from shy. One of my adult females doesn't even jump away if I poke her, and the rest are pretty bold too, even though they might jump away if I talk loudly or move quickly. Considering that you can keep a large number of them together, you will pretty much always be able to spot a few of them, and as I mentioned, they tend to be bolder in groups. The biggest drawback with this species is most likely their loud call. I absolutely love relaxing in my frog room on a rainy day, just listening to my dart frogs calling, but I should still mention that Epipedobates anthonyi have a call that's louder than most other dart frogs, and they usually also call a lot more frequently than other species. They are diurnal though, so there's usually no calling during the night. I did manage to get some footage of one of my males calling the other day, so let's have a listen. There are plenty of other dart frogs out there that have a call with a similar sound but on a slightly lower volume, and there are also plenty of species that are barely audible at all. It's also possible to only keep females, since only the males call. The call really is the only potential disadvantage I can think of when it comes to this species, along with the possibility that some might find their coloration to be less impressive than other dart frogs, but those factors are both completely up to the keeper's own taste. Aside from that, I think they're the perfect beginner dart frogs, but once again, there are also plenty of other dart frog species out there that are beginner friendly, such as the frogs from the Dendrobates and Phyllobates genus, and if you don't find the Epipedobates anthonyi to be particularly interesting, you shouldn't get them as a practice frog or something just because I said it was the easiest, because in reality there's barely any difference in difficulty level between Epipedobates anthonyi and the other beginner friendly dart frogs out there, and you could even argue that some other species is in fact easier. I currently keep a group of 6 animals in an Exoterra measuring 90 by 45 by 90 centimeters or 36 by 18 by 36 inches. I could easily keep more than twice that number of animals in there, as they work well in big groups and can be kept in more densely populated vivariums than some other dart frogs, but I didn't want too many since it gets very loud when you have a certain number of males calling their lungs out all day. I also have plenty of young froglets from them in a grow-out vivarium where they live together with some Phyllobates vittatus froglets. I wouldn't call this species strictly terrestrial or arboreal, but they're probably leaning towards the terrestrial side. They're very adaptable though and would be happy in either a terrestrial or an arboreal setup. In my large vivarium, the big females stay on the ground more than 90% of the time, while the males spend a lot more time on the branches and in bromeliads in the upper half. For most dart frogs, I usually recommend at least a 45 by 45 by 45 centimeter enclosure, which is an 18-inch cube, or some other vivarium size that provides a similar amount of room. For small frogs like Epipedobates anthonyi, I think something smaller like a 10-gallon aquarium or something could be acceptable if you're only keeping 1 to 3 frogs, but I still highly recommend something bigger, especially if you're a new keeper. The setup that I keep mine in is very similar to those of my other dart frogs, with the same temperature, humidity, substrate, lighting, and so on. And if you want to know more about general poison dart frog care, you can check out my playlist Dart Frog Care for Beginners, where I have several videos you might find useful. I will leave a link to the playlist in the description or in a pinned comment. This video will only focus on the species-specific details. Epipedobates anthonyi is one of, if not the easiest dart frog to breed for many reasons, and this has also led to them being among the cheapest and most common dart frogs on the market. Some dart frogs are very reluctant to lay eggs, requiring a dry and a wet season, perfect egg laying sites, a really good enclosure or the perfect group configuration to be willing to breed, But these guys will usually just lay eggs regardless, as long as you have a male and a female and keep them in a decent vivarium. They lay eggs very frequently, and their clutches are quite large, with everything from 15 to 30 eggs per clutch, and they kind of just keep breeding. I get at least 20 eggs a week from my group, so that would make it more than 1,000 frogs in a year if I raise them all. And if you get the species to start breeding, there's a high likelihood that you'll get more offspring than you can reasonably take care of, considering that you'll need somewhere to keep all the froglets, and a market big enough for you to be able to find good homes for them all. This isn't a problem though, since you really don't have to raise them all. Usually the eggs and tadpoles have to be taken out of the vivarium and be taken care of to make it into froglets, and I personally only do that with 10 to 20 tadpoles from each of my frog species every year. The eggs are usually laid on leaves, in the leaf litter or in film canisters, and they're not picky about egg laying sites at all. Once the eggs hatch, the male will carry a huge pack of tadpoles on his back and drop them off in a suitable water source. If you are unable to find the eggs and take them out, but you spot the male carrying a pack of tadpoles, then you can actually just add a water dish and he will most likely deposit them all there within a few days, or at least when it's time for the next clutch. A big convenience with this species is that their tadpoles can be raised communally. Some dart frogs, such as all the Epipedobates species, would need quite a large tub to be kept communally to avoid cannibalism, but Epipedobates can be kept together even in smaller spaces without any issues. Of course I don't encourage overcrowding your tadpole bins, but there's no problem at all with keeping quite a large number of them in a pretty small container. If you have a water feature in the vivarium, you could probably also let all the tadpoles develop there. This makes it easier to raise a large number of tadpoles, but again, I still wouldn't recommend raising too many, since it would be difficult to find good homes for them. They also grow much faster than my tadpoles from other species. In fact, my Epipedobates tadpoles morph out in about a month and a half, which is twice as fast as any of my other species. There's one slightly more difficult aspect, which is that the froglets are very small when they metamorph, so you will have to feed them springtails or some other small feeder insects, as they won't be able to take fruit flies right away. But this isn't anything too difficult, as long as you make sure your springtail cultures are thriving. That was all I had to say about the Epipedobates anthonyi, and now it's time for the ultimate question. Is it the right frog for you? If you're looking for a small, hardy dart frog with an interesting group dynamic, you want a frog that doesn't need too much food or take up too much room, and you don't mind the loud call, then Epipedobates anthonyi might just be the perfect pet poison dart frog for you. It's a very interesting frog to keep and one that I can highly recommend. Now, that's it for today's video. What do you think is the best beginner dart frog? Please feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to the channel and share it with a couple of people. It's completely free and it's the best way for you to help me grow this channel. Make sure to also press the notification bell so you won't miss out on any future uploads. Thank you so much for 2,000 subscribers and for all the support recently. If you want to see more of my animal room, you can check out my Instagram at gecko_geek06. Thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video.